The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you second guess if you even belong in the space anymore. It had been that way since Dad passed. Billings, Montana, always had this in-between stillness during mid-autumn. Cool winds sneaking through window cracks, dry leaves scratching the sidewalk, the kind of days that just sat heavy on your shoulders. I was folding laundry I didn't really care about when my phone buzzed. It was from Rowena. I stared at her name for a while. She hadn't texted in months, not when Dad died, not when I asked about the will, not even a simple, "Are you holding up okay?" And now, suddenly, a message. "We'd love to have you join us at the cabin next weekend. A small, private memorial for Dad. Just family. Hope you can make it." No heart emoji. No love row. It felt like a line from a lawyer. I reread it twice. The words were clean, neat, rehearsed. The kind of thing you send when you're obligated, not when you miss someone. I put the phone down and leaned back in the chair. My mind drifted. Last time I saw Rowena, she shut me down when I asked about Dad's will. Said, "It's being handled. Don't complicate things." That same weekend, Bronson walked me out without making eye contact. They handled everything. The arrangements, the service, the story. I wasn't even asked to speak at the funeral. Not a reading, not a word. So now, a weekend gathering. A memorial. Neatly worded, tidy, just like they like things. I stared out the window at the brown-tipped trees. Why now? I wondered. Was this a peace offering? Or a trap wrapped in civility? If I went, would I be showing weakness? Or if I stayed away, would that just confirm what they've always said behind my back? That I isolate myself, that I hold grudges, that I don't know how to let go? Then I heard Dad's voice in my mind. Not soft, not angry. Just steady. "Don't let them rewrite me, Mars." So I stood up and went to my closet. I packed light, neutral clothes, nothing too nostalgic but not distant either. Something that wouldn't draw attention but wouldn't make me invisible. I folded Dad's old pocket watch into the side zipper of my bag. Still worked, still ticked, still his. One of the few things they hadn't claimed or repurposed. Before leaving the apartment, I stopped by a local florist, picked out a small bundle of dried lavender. Dad loved lavender. He said it reminded him of the farm his father used to tend when he was a kid. I printed my train ticket at the library. Didn't want to rely on anyone to drive me up. That kind of dependency gave Rowena room to maneuver. Not this time. That night, before bed, I opened my journal and wrote only one line. "This time, I will not be invisible." The train ride up was as long and winding as my thoughts. I watched out the window as the trees turned from gold to red to bare. The further we climbed into Blue Creek, the more the air felt like it was holding something back. I stepped off the platform, called for a local cab, and sat through a quiet 30-minute ride into the hills. The cabin came into view just as the sun dipped behind the pines. It looked almost the same, but not quite. A new gate stood tall where there wasn't one before, with a keypad entry and security sign on the fence. Nothing about this place had ever needed securing before. A young guy in a vest answered the intercom and buzzed me in. Not a family member, not even someone I recognized, just a hired hand. Rowena didn't come out to greet me. Inside, the cabin was polished, not cozy. The wood floors gleamed unnaturally. Pictures were framed too neatly. Candles lined the stairway like a boutique spa. It smelled like citrus and cedar, not like Dad, not like home. I set my bag down in the corner of the foyer and scanned the guest board. Names written on parchment, arranged in circles. Family seating. I wasn't there. Instead, I found my name, Mars Devereaux, printed on a small folded card placed discreetly on the corner table, beneath a bowl of peppermints, misspelled. A young woman offered to show me to my room. Said she'd just started working for Mrs. Caro. Didn't say Rowena's name like a sister. Said it like a boss. She led me down the back hallway, past the main bedrooms, to a narrow stairwell I didn't even know existed. At the bottom was a small room near the laundry. No window, no heat. On the nightstand was a welcome packet. The letter inside was addressed to all immediate family, signed only by Rowena. I flipped to the schedule, readings, speeches, moments of reflection. I wasn't listed anywhere, so that was the tone. I sat on the edge of the bed, looked around the plain room, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I could already feel what this weekend was going to be. They needed me to witness the story they were curating, not to contribute, not to be seen, just to be present, to complete a picture they'd already painted. I didn't unpack, just opened the lavender, placed it on the table, and waited for the next move. I hadn't even made it 3 steps past the foyer when I heard it. "Don't come closer!" It came from the hallway behind me, sharp, scared. I froze. The room fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Conversations cut mid-laugh. Even the fire seemed to still itself. I turned slowly. There stood Quincy, my nephew, at the edge of the living room, his eyes wide, voice trembling. He looked straight at me like I was a stranger who'd wandered too far. His hands gripped the frame of the doorway, knuckles pale. Rowena was up in seconds, brushing past chairs like it was all some funny misunderstanding. "Kids say the weirdest things, don't they?" she called out, laughing. The kind of laugh you force when you've been caught off script. She placed her hand on Quincy's shoulder and leaned down, whispering something I couldn't hear. His eyes dropped, his lips pressed into a tight line. No one else said anything. One woman offered me a nervous smile. A man cleared his throat and looked away. I nodded to myself, gave a polite smile, and kept walking forward. But in my chest, something cracked. The staff member from earlier stepped beside me, ready to lead me to my room. She didn't call me Ms. Devereaux or Aunt Marce, just gestured toward the back hall with a generic, "This way." I followed. The walls we passed were lined with new family portraits, perfectly staged photos of Rowena, Bronson, and Quincy, holiday trips, graduation shots, posed summer hikes, every frame immaculate, every smile rehearsed, and not a single one had me in it. We turned down a side hallway into a space that smelled faintly of detergent and damp wood. She opened a door near what looked like a pantry and motioned me inside. It wasn't much bigger than a storage room. A twin bed, a small dresser, a soft buzzing from the water heater tucked behind a closet door. She left without saying a word. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. My suitcase sat alone in the corner. No other bags, no note, no sign this room was ever intended for family. I started unpacking slowly, a pair of shoes, my toiletries. Dad's pocket watch still wrapped in an old handkerchief. The silence in the room felt thick, like the walls themselves didn't want me there. I caught my breath and tried not to let it burn. I saw Quincy's face again in my mind. His fear, his trembling voice, that wasn't confusion. That was a warning. And it wasn't always like this. Back when Quincy was 5, I made him a storybook. Drew the dragons myself, wrote the story by hand. He used to call me Auntie Marce the Brave, said I was cooler than superheroes because I didn't need powers to stand up to bad guys. We had a secret handshake too, one Rowena didn't like, said it was too silly for family gatherings, said we were too loud. After Dad's funeral, that all changed. Quincy started pulling away. His words came filtered, polished, like he was scared of saying too much. Now I wasn't sure if he was warned, or if he just learned not to trust the space between us. Later that night, I wandered into the kitchen after dinner. Rowena was pouring herself a glass of wine. The house had thinned out, most people outside, enjoying the mountain air. "I want to ask you something," I said, quiet but clear. She didn't look up. "Sure." "About Quincy, that outburst earlier? That wasn't nothing." She turned slowly. "He's just confused. You haven't been around, so he barely knows you anymore." I let that hang in the air. "Or has he been told not to know me?" Her smile thinned. "You left, Marce. Don't make this weekend about you." And there it was. The old mask dropped. For just a second. Then she turned back to her wine like the conversation never happened. I walked out. Back in my room, I found a gift bag on the bed, tissue paper folded too neatly. Inside was a brochure for the memorial service. On the back, names of speakers, readers, hosts. I wasn't one of them. I pulled out the final item, a letter, typed, signed Rowena. It read, "We hope you can be here to witness Dad's legacy being honored the right way." Witness. Not participate. Not honor. Witness. The words blurred a little as I read them again. The right way. It hit me like a wave. I wasn't invited here to be part of something. I was here to validate a version of him they were curating. A version of us. They didn't want me to speak. They wanted me to sit, smile, fade. That night I closed my eyes and dreamed of Dad. He wasn't smiling. He didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, watching me from the other side of the room. After dinner, the house took on a hush, not the kind of peaceful quiet you hope for, but the kind that feels curated, like someone dimmed the lights just right, lit candles at exact angles, and softened music to a low, agreeable hum. The kind of silence that's meant to impress or control. I walked into the main room where everyone was gathering. The fireplace was already lit, a soft pop of logs undercutting the hum of wine glasses and casual laughter. People were scattered in polished clusters, old neighbors, some distant relatives I hadn't seen since Dad's retirement party. There was a rhythm to their chatter, like they'd rehearsed this version of the family story all day and were now ready for the final act. I scanned for my name. Any sign of a seat? There was none. I found a small ottoman near the window and settled on its edge, hands clasped. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't even want to sit. I just needed not to stand out more than I already did. A woman near the fire leaned toward me. "Are you with catering?" I looked at her, smiled politely, and said nothing. She flushed and turned back to her drink. At the far end of the room, someone rolled out a screen and set up a projector. A title slide faded in. Memories of Ambrose. My palms started sweating. Not because I was nervous about being seen, but because I wasn't sure I would be. Rowena stepped to the front like a speaker at a fundraiser. She looked confident, polished, perfectly sad in that dignified way people master when they've had practice. She started, "Tonight, we celebrate the legacy we carry, the man who showed us strength in stillness and grace in perseverance." Photos began to play. Dad laughing at a cookout with Bronson. Dad walking Quincy to the bus stop. Dad receiving a community award, Rowena at his side. Birthday cakes, old road trips, church fundraisers. The camera had been generous to them. It loved them. Slide after slide. Not once did it find me. I tried to keep my face blank, but the silence inside me was thunderous. And then, there it was. One photo. A group shot on the front lawn, clearly recent. I stared hard at it. My image was in the back, slightly misaligned. The light hitting me didn't match. My hand faded strangely into a bush, photoshopped. Someone had added me in. They didn't just erase me, they manufactured my presence so I wouldn't have to be invited. That was the only photo I appeared in, digitally, not actually. As the slideshow ended, people clapped. Some dabbed their eyes. I nodded quietly. My fists stayed clenched in my lap. Then Rowena cleared her throat and said, "Now, as we prepare for tomorrow's service, I'd like to go over the roles." She listed names. Bronson would speak first. Quincy would place the final rose. A neighbor would read scripture. The choir director from town would close with a hymn. Each name was met with nods of agreement. I waited. Nothing. Finally, I raised my hand, gentle. "Is there something I should be doing?" Rowena's face stayed fixed, only her eyes narrowed slightly. "Your presence is more than enough, Mars." Several others smiled in that uncomfortable way people do when they'd rather not be dragged into whatever that is. I smiled back. I've always been a fast learner, especially when someone's teaching me how little I matter in their plan. Later, I stepped outside for air. That's when Bronson found me. He leaned on the railing next to me like we were old friends. Thanks for not making a scene in there, he said. Gracious, really. I didn't answer. He stared out at the trees. Legacy's a tricky thing. It's about continuity. And honestly, you never really liked structure anyway. I looked over at him. Structure doesn't mean omission. He smiled, slow and cold. Let's keep tomorrow smooth for everyone. It wasn't a suggestion. It was an order wrapped in charm. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I had nothing left to say that wouldn't be used against me. Back in my room, I opened my journal and wrote the only sentence that made sense. If I don't exist to them, I will exist for me. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photo. Me and Dad. Blue Creek Kitchen, 2005. I was cutting carrots. He was laughing at something dumb I'd said. I didn't remember the joke, but I remembered how easy it was to feel loved in that moment. The photo was wrinkled at the corners, edges curled, but it was real. I laid it beside me on the bed and took a breath. They were rewriting everything, and I'd let them for too long. Not anymore. I didn't need to speak tomorrow. Not yet. But I wouldn't be invisible either. I was getting ready to turn off the lamp when I noticed it, tucked beneath the leg of the guest chair near the corner, just barely peeking out, a white envelope. The carpet had swallowed most of it, but I saw the edge and the soft curve of my name written in a hand I'd recognize even with my eyes closed. Dad's handwriting. I didn't move at first. I just stared at it, like it might disappear if I blinked. Then I reached down, slowly, and slid it out. The paper felt dry, slightly yellowed, like it had waited patiently for me. My name was written in blue ink. Nothing else on the front. No date. No seal. My fingers hesitated at the flap. I thought of all the things it could be. A grocery list, maybe something unfinished. But deep down, I knew better. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet, one page, folded twice. The date at the top made my stomach tighten. 2 weeks before he died. If you're reading this, I didn't do enough in time. I read it once. Then again. And again. He wrote about how tired he'd been, how Rowena had started taking over everything. Said he hadn't fought hard enough when she changed the hospice team, or when Bronson brought that new lawyer around. I signed papers I shouldn't have. I let the noise around me get louder than what I knew was true. He didn't name specifics. He didn't mention property or the foundation, but the tone was clear. You were the one who stayed. You were the one who asked nothing but gave everything. They called you distant, but I saw you. I always saw you. Don't let them make you disappear. The last line hit harder than I thought anything could at that point. You are my truth. I sat there with the letter pressed between my palms, not crying, not speaking, just still. It was like someone had reached into the fog and handed me a compass, a piece of clarity. He had known, all of it. I thought back to the final days. His silence. The way he held my wrist tighter than usual when I brought him water. How he whispered my name but didn't finish the sentence. I'd blamed it on the meds, on exhaustion, on dying. But now I wondered if he was trying to warn me then, and I missed it. He knew, I whispered. He saw it too. That night, I didn't sleep. At some point before dawn, I folded the letter and slid it between the pages of a novel in my suitcase. Something no one would think to check. When I walked into the kitchen for breakfast, the sun had barely risen over the tree line. The light spilled in soft and gold, but it didn't warm anything. Rowena stood at the stove, flipping pancakes like this was any other weekend. Bronson was on the phone, whispering about linens and microphone placements. Quincy sat at the table, staring at his plate. Sleep all right? Rowena asked without turning around. Fine, I said, my tone even. She smiled at the wall. Big day ahead. Everyone else seemed ready to smile on cue, move in rhythm. But I saw it now, the effort behind the show. The way Rowena's voice stayed just a hair too bright. The way Bronson spoke in half sentences like someone monitoring their own script. And me, I didn't feel unsure anymore, or guilty, or fragile. I ate my breakfast in silence, eyes steady, posture straight. I didn't need to say anything. Not yet. Later, after most of them had gone off to prepare the outdoor area for the service, I took a walk along the edge of the woods. I needed space to breathe, to hear something real. The wind rustled through the trees. The smell of pine clung to my jacket. I pulled the letter out of my pocket and read it one more time. Let the words sit with me. He had written them by hand. No witness, no signature. But it was more binding than any legal document. You are my truth. I wrote in my journal before heading back. They erased me from the pictures. But I'm still here. It wasn't bitterness anymore. It wasn't revenge. It was clarity. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was holding the pen. As I neared the porch, I saw Bronson standing there. He was holding something. From the look on his face and the way his fingers gripped it, whatever it wasn't meant for me. The next morning came in quiet, as if the wind itself didn't want to disturb anything. I skipped breakfast, walked past the dining area without a word. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I guess everyone was too busy prepping the seating for tomorrow's big performance. I found myself walking toward the old music room without thinking. My feet knew the turns better than my head. The same hallway, same wooden panels, but it all felt newer, sanitized. The door was already open. The Steinway was gone. In its place sat a pair of white lounge chairs, a wall of wine racks, a curated selection of bourbon bottles behind glass. A small brass sign was nailed to the entry. The Heritage Lounge. Heritage, my ass. I stepped inside. The air didn't hold the same warmth. No scent of polish, no trace of strings, not even the scuff marks on the floor from the piano bench. Just sterilized silence. I used to sit in that room while Dad played Bach. Sometimes Chopin when he felt nostalgic. I'd lay next to the piano with a sketchbook or a snack, just listening, breathing in the life that room carried. This wasn't a tribute. It was a redesign. I turned and headed out to the patio, where Bronson was barking out directions to a team of staff arranging chairs. I waited until he was alone. "Where's the piano?" I asked. He didn't even glance up from his clipboard. "Auctioned it last month." Rowena thought it cluttered the space. Cluttered. My chest went tight. He called that his last friend. Bronson finally looked at me, not with shame, just irritation. "The proceeds went toward the new family foundation, you know, the one you didn't want to be part of." I nodded slowly, let the heat rise, then pushed it down. "Was anyone going to ask me?" He shrugged. "It belonged to the house." That line stuck in my head long after he left me standing there. It belonged to the house. I walked back toward the kitchen, but didn't stop. And instead, I veered into the study, what used to be Dad's workspace. They'd turned it into a mini office now. Printer, cabinets, decorative books that had never been opened. I pulled open a drawer under the desk. There it was. A printed newsletter from the foundation, Volume 1, stapled neatly. A photo of Rowena smiling at a podium. Inside, full-color spreads listing board members, founders, supporters, contributors, Rowena, Bronson, Quincy, even that guy from the garden club Dad hated. My name wasn't mentioned once. I flipped to the back. There it was. Inspired by Ambrose Devereaux's legacy of structure and family unity. Unity. I laughed, once, quiet and flat. They'd turned the word into a weapon. I snapped a photo with my phone and stuffed the newsletter into my coat pocket. Back in my room, I didn't sit. I didn't sigh. I just grabbed my journal and opened a blank page. I started writing. Not a story, not a complaint, a record. What was gone? What had changed? What no one else was saying out loud? I opened a new folder on my phone and labeled it, What they won't remember. It wasn't about payback. It was about survival, about memory, about saying, "This happened, even if no one else would." I dropped in a picture of the newsletter, scanned a copy of Dad's letter, jotted down the timeline of the auction date Bronson mentioned. No drama, no fire, just the truth, stacked and sorted. Then I closed my eyes, let the silence fill in the cracks, and sat down to breathe. And just when I thought I'd seen enough, Rowena walked in, still smiling, a decorative box in her hands. "Dad wanted you to have this," she said. She found me just before dinner, just as the sky began to bruise into twilight. Most of the guests were milling around the dining area, sipping wine, talking like they'd already forgotten this was supposed to be about my father. That's when Rowena stepped into the middle of the room and called my name, loud enough to turn heads, quiet enough to seem sweet. "I have something for you," she said. In her hands was a wooden box, walnut, polished, decorative edges, too ornate to be from Dad himself. She handed it to me like a stage manager handing off a final prop. "Dad wanted you to have this." I opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in tissue, was a photo of him, one I hadn't seen before. He was seated on the cabin porch, smiling, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Attached to the frame was a small note. "Thank you for being part of the circle." I stared at the note. The ink was too even, the loops too round. It wasn't his handwriting. My jaw tightened, but I smiled. Around me, guests murmured with practiced warmth, "How thoughtful." "That's so sweet. He always included everyone." I said thank you. My voice was hollow. Rowena nodded, satisfied, and turned her attention back to the crowd. No one noticed the way I gripped the bottom of the frame just a little too long. Later, she invited everyone into the lounge. That's what they called it now. Used to be the den where Dad and I planned the foundation together. Now it was candlelit, decorated in navy and gold, with fresh eucalyptus scent sprayed just heavy enough to cover up the dust of memory. Along the far wall stood what they'd named the Ambrose Foundation Honor Wall. A series of bronze plaques gleamed under overhead lights. Each one bore the name of someone who'd helped shape the legacy. Rowena, Bronson, Quincy, even a family friend who ran the local newspaper. I walked slowly, reading each one. Some guests whispered behind me, admiring the wall like it was art. I kept looking. And looking. My name wasn't there, not even misspelled. I stepped back, read the quote etched into the top of the display. "True legacy lies in unity." It felt like a punch dressed as poetry. Beside me, a younger woman asked another, "Who's that woman over there?" She meant me. They both glanced my way. Neither corrected the other. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked out the back door into the cold. The air outside was sharp, honest. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my notes until I found the file. The original mission statement. The one I had written with Dad, line by line, when he was still lucid. I read it again. The phrasing on the wall inside matched almost exactly, word for word in parts. I closed my eyes. My hand trembled, not from grief this time, but from something steadier. Purpose. "They won't own this version of the truth," I said. I opened the voice recorder and hit record. Entry 1. Today they presented a lie as a tribute. I let the silence at the end of the sentence breathe before I stopped the recording. Later that evening, while the others toasted each other over lamb and Chianti, I sat in my room with the wooden box still on the bed. I opened the back of the frame and slid the fake note out, folded it, slid in something new, a printed copy of our original mission statement. I flipped the frame over and, with a pencil, wrote on the back, "Drafted by Marcellus Devereaux, Fall 2022. It was small, quiet, almost petty, but it was mine. I placed the frame on the nightstand and stared at it, not as a gift but as evidence, not a token of inclusion, but a line drawn in the dust. The truth was no longer something they got to narrate. Just before midnight, my phone buzzed. A photo attachment, no name, no message. And the image? It made my breath stop. The photo hit my phone with a soft buzz. No sender, no caption. Just an image. It was high resolution, too crisp for coincidence. A family portrait. Everyone was there. Rowena, Bronson, Quincy, even the neighbor couple Dad liked for their lemon bars. And me, front and center, shoulder to shoulder with Rowena, wearing a cardigan I'd never owned. My stomach turned before my brain caught up. I zoomed in. The lighting on my face didn't match the rest. The shadow on my neck was wrong. My posture stiffer than natural. I'd been cut in, edited in. They had created a moment I wasn't part of, and digitally forced me into it. I sat on the bed, still holding the wooden box from earlier, the one with the fake note pretending to be from Dad. My breath slowed. My jaw clenched. They didn't just push me out of the story. They were writing me back in, on their terms. After the hallway lights dimmed and the house quieted, I left my room. Careful steps down the carpeted hall. No creaks. I moved like I used to as a teenager sneaking out. Except this time, I wasn't the one doing something wrong. I stood in front of the framed photo. It was right where the picture had shown it would be, hung perfectly on the central hallway wall. Beneath it, a tiny bronze plaque read, "Our final gathering, fall 2023." That was the year I hadn't even been told about the retreat. I'd been at work, alone, and now I was in this memory like I'd never been gone. I stared at it until the details blurred. It wasn't just manipulation, it was something colder than that. It was manufactured forgiveness, staged inclusion. I turned away before my stomach flipped. The office door was slightly open. I stepped inside, turned on the desk lamp, and woke up the laptop that sat there. Rowena's, probably. No password prompt. That was the kind of arrogance that made everything else possible. There was a folder right on the desktop. Memorial assets. Inside, another folder. Photo sets. And one more. Alternate versions. I clicked. Versions of the same group photo scrolled across the screen. Some with me, some without. Some with someone else entirely standing where I supposedly had been. Then I found a memo file, typed, dated last week. Final version with Mars added, per optics. That word made my skin crawl. Optics. I wasn't family. I was furniture. Framing. I copied the entire folder to my USB drive without a second thought. Back in my room, I sat on the floor, legs crossed like I used to do during Dad's lectures about ethics and integrity. I opened the original photo, the untouched one, no me in it, and it made more sense than anything else I'd seen in years. They didn't want peace. They wanted the appearance of peace, the illusion of family. That fake picture on the hallway wasn't for me. It was for the guests, the donors, the newsletter, the image. They want the appearance of unity, I said out loud, but not the work it takes to build it. I deleted the text from my phone but kept the USB. I didn't need to argue about my place anymore. I had proof of the erasure and of the fabrication. That night, while the rest of the house laughed over glasses of red and told stories they'd rehearsed all weekend, I opened my laptop and started typing. An email to myself. Evidence in case they spin this. Attached. The photo, the memo, the list of versions. Then I started a new note. My own eulogy draft. Not the one Rowena had printed in the program, but my truth. In my journal, I wrote a single line. They replaced me in the photo. Tomorrow I speak in my own frame. My hands didn't shake this time. I didn't feel angry anymore, just focused. They could have the walls. I had the mirror. The morning air felt like glass, thin, sharp, breakable. The deck behind the cabin had been dressed like a wedding venue. Rows of white chairs faced a small podium set against the backdrop of the trees. Classical music played through speakers hidden under the railing. A slideshow cycled through stills on a screen near the side wall. The same photos, the same edited memories, the same lie. I stood at the edge of the gathering, clutching the printed speech they'd asked me to read, then ignored when they published the program. My name wasn't anywhere, No introduction. No role. Rowena floated between guests, touching arms, offering those tight smiles that belonged in campaign ads. Bronson circled the tech crew, adjusting volume levels and nodding like a manager running a grand opening. Quincy lingered alone at the end of a row, chewing the edge of his thumbnail, eyes on the ground. I looked down at the other paper I'd brought. My version. Not theirs. The air settled just before Rowena took the stage. She stepped up gracefully, her heels clicking with intention. She opened her notes with the kind of pause you learn from years of rehearsing vulnerability. She spoke of our Father, of his wisdom, his strength. She referenced scripture, then spun into phrases that made strangers nod and relatives tear up. She said, "My father taught me to lead with purpose, to listen to silence, and to build bridges, even with those who tried to burn them." Her eyes flicked to me briefly. That part was for me. Then she closed with a line that cut deeper than she likely intended, or maybe exactly as she meant it. We all have roles. Some are made to lead, others to love quietly from the sides. People clapped. I stood still. It was a slap wrapped in sentiment, a reminder of the role they had written for me. But I hadn't agreed to the script. Before the applause died, I walked toward the podium. No one stopped me. They just watched. Some curious, some uncomfortable. Rowena froze mid-smile, her expression flickering before resetting. I held the frame in my hand, the one she'd given me, but I'd rewritten, and I placed it on the stand. I didn't look at her. I looked at the crowd. "I was asked to love from the sidelines," I began, voice steady. "But my father asked me to never disappear." Silence. I unfolded a single sheet of paper. Not the printed program. My father's words. "You were the one who asked nothing but gave everything." I didn't read more. I didn't have to. A different kind of stillness fell over the space. A kind of listening people don't fake. Rowena didn't move. Bronson looked at his feet. Quincy watched me, jaw set. I stepped down. And then a car pulled into the gravel driveway. The door opened and Harlan got out. Dad's old attorney, gray coat, worn face, briefcase in hand. He walked straight to the podium without introduction, without showmanship. I've been asked by Mr. Ambrose Devereaux, per his final legal instructions, to deliver and read a document he submitted with notarized backup. This will, according to Montana state law, supersedes any prior arrangements unless formally revoked, which I have no record of. Rowena's face dropped. Harlan read it word for word. The cabin, the ethical estate, the legacy items, all assigned to me. Executor, Marcellus Devereaux. The crowd shifted. A few gasps. A neighbor whispered, "That wasn't in the program." And then Quincy. He leaned toward Rowena and asked, quiet but loud enough for me to hear, "You told me that wasn't real." Rowena stood. "This is outdated," she snapped. "Dad changed this verbally. He said it to me, to Bronson, to half the family. Everyone knew." Harlan didn't flinch. "No change was filed, no signature was recorded, no legal update exists." She turned to me. "You knew this and came anyway?" I nodded. "I came because I wasn't going to let someone else bury him twice." Then I turned the photo frame around. On the back, written in pencil, was the line, "Drafted by Marcellus Devereaux, Fall 2022. People stared, and not at her. He slipped it into my hand so quietly, I almost didn't notice. Quincy, small, serious, soft-spoken, pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm and darted back to the car like nothing had happened. No words, no goodbye. Just that small motion and the weight it carried. I waited until I was alone behind the cabin before I unfolded it. Crayon, stick figures, him and Dad, and me, drawn at a piano. A little caption in shaky handwriting read, "I know they were wrong. I remember you." I sat down on the porch steps and let that settle. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't some dramatic reconciliation. It was something quieter, deeper. A child's memory that hadn't been edited yet. A version of the story that hadn't been rewritten. I placed the drawing into the back of my journal, right next to Dad's letter. My fingers lingered on the edges, as if holding them longer would help me hold on to everything they meant. As the cars began to leave, one after another, the cabin started to feel like what it truly was: empty, stripped down, a shell dressed in polished wood and expensive throw pillows. I stepped back inside. The hallway still held that fake photo, the one I'd been photoshopped into. It looked the same. Stiff smiles, manufactured harmony. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I walked to the old study, the one now redesigned into a wine room with mood lighting and motivational quotes on the walls. I bent down to the bottom shelf of the far bookcase, tucked the USB behind a thick, untouched volume about legacy building. "Let the truth sit here," I whispered. "It'll find its way out eventually." No final showdown, no slam of the door, just exit. I didn't look for Rowena. I didn't need to hear another excuse. There wasn't anything left to say that wouldn't twist further into theater. That was her gift, not mine. Outside, the clouds were thinning. Quincy stood by their car, arms crossed, chin tilted. His parents were mid-argument about bags or traffic or something that didn't matter. He walked toward me again, slower this time. "Will you still play piano sometimes?" he asked. I knelt in front of him. "I never stopped." He nodded, then hugged me. Quick, not quite tight, but real. As he turned to go, he whispered, "When I grow up, I'll tell it different." I nodded back. That's all I ever needed. And that was it. I climbed into my car and took the long route out of Blue Creek. Winding roads, autumn trees, the sky stretching wider with every mile. I rolled down the window and let the wind take my hair, cool and clean. At a small overlook by the edge of the mountain, I pulled over. I got out, took the frame from the front seat, the one Rowena had given me, the one I had rewritten. I pulled out the fake note she'd tucked inside, held it between my fingers for a breath, then let the wind carry it away. From my bag, I slid out a strip of paper I'd written that morning. "Truth needs no permission." I placed it behind the photo and sealed it shut. Back in Billings, my apartment smelled like lavender again. I hadn't noticed that in a long time. I placed Quincy's drawing on the fridge, his words echoing louder than most adults had ever spoken to me. I dug my keyboard out of the closet, plugged it in, tested the keys. Then I lit a small candle next to a framed photo of me and Dad, just us, back when things didn't need context. I opened my laptop, created a folder, Inheritance, the version I lived, and I started typing, not for them, for me.